Okay, so what we're going to look at today is we're going to talk about how to find the inverse equation of a function. Basically what an inverse does, remember, it just switches the x and y values. So in our original equation here, we have y equals 7x plus 3. If I plug in x, x is now what my starting value is. And so I would plug a number in for x and find out what my final result would be. Well, an inverse is going to go backwards. Inverse is going to allow you to start with the final answer and go back to find what the original was. So, what will happen is this. But I'm going to make a little flowchart to kind of demonstrate what's happening. First thing I'm going to do is, if I start with x, I'm going to multiply by 7. So I would have 4 times 7, and that gives us 28. Next thing I would do is I would start with 28, and then I'm going to add 3 to the equation. Well, 28 plus 3 will give you 31. So I know my final answer would be y equals 31. Now what the inverse is going to do is going to go backwards of everything. I'm going to start with 31 and go backwards. Well, over here I did plus 3, so now I'm going to do minus 3. So when I do that, I get 31 minus 3 gives you 28. Next thing I would do is, instead of multiplying by 7, the opposite over here is times 7, so I'm going to divide by 7. And when I divide by 7, I get 28 divided by 7, that gives us our 4, which is what we had to the beginning. So if I want to write out what my equation is going to be, my actual equation would be y equals, well, technically I guess we could say it would be an x equals, since we're trying to find out what we started with, I would say x equals y minus 3. And then I have to divide that whole thing, whatever I got there, by 7. So notice I put that top on parentheses to make sure I'm dividing everything by 7. Now, since we can't have an equation start with x equals, because we'll have a really difficult time graphing it, what we'll do is we introduce a new notation. This new notation is this. To show that we're talking about the inverse, is I let f to the negative 1x, and this is notation to show that this is an inverse of f of x. So now, what this actual equation will look like above, it will look like this. To show it's an inverse, I'll do f inverse of x equals x minus 3 over 7. And because I know that this right here is inverse notation, I know my x that I'm using is actually the original y. So when you see inverse notation, you know that this x is actually what you knew the final answer to be, and not the same x that was above. Now, to solve for the inverse, here's what we're going to do. First thing I'm going to do is replace f of x with y. So this ends up being now y equals negative 2x minus 8. Second thing I do is I'm going to switch the x and y values. So this now becomes x equals negative 2y minus 8. And now I solve this for y using step 3. So I'm going to add 8 to both sides. And when I do that, I get x plus 8 equals negative 2y. And then my final step, I would divide both sides by negative 2. But notice I got to divide the whole thing by negative 2. And I end up with x plus 8 divided by negative 2 equals y. And step 4 is replace y with inverse notation. So my final answer would be f to the negative 1 x equals x plus 8 divided by negative 2. And that's how you find the inverse.